So, Joe, you posted a picture of a keyboard, and it piqued my interest.
It's a very nice keyboard. I'm a fan. I would like one that's nicer yet, but it is pretty good for the dollars I put into it. It's pretty solid. I'll say that.
So, what did you get?
Do I dare spell all the details out now? so the
Yes.
story here is that I am putting in a standing desk at work. So I actually have 2 desks now. Maybe 3, depending on how you look at it. I have my desk that's in like the office area. And then we have a video room where we do all of our video production stuff for our live streams on Sunday mornings and such. And I put a standing desk in that room. And as part of that, I wanted things to where I could dock in multiple places. One of those docks is here at home, where I'm at right now, if you're watching the live feed. Hi. The other is at that desk that I can go sit at, and then the third is at my new standing desk. The desk I sit at work has no external keyboard. I just use my laptop there, so I don't really dock there. The standing desk, however, I intend to spend a decent amount of time there, so I needed a dock, USB hubs, all the stuff, and decided to put in a mechanical keyboard there. And church let me purchase one on their dime, so I picked up a Keychron K8. So it's the 10 keyless version of their keyboard. And then I floated my way over to wasdkeyboards.com, set up a custom printed set of keycaps, and replaced all the keycaps on said keyboard. Oh, I should note, the switches on this for the mechanical nuts are the Gateron Browns, because I have Cherry MX Browns in my DOS keyboard, which is sitting right in front of me at this moment. And I really, really, really have been wanting to compare the Cherries to the Gaterons. So that experiment has begun. So yes, I have a new Keychron.
Nice. I know somebody else who just got a K8. Spoiler alert, I guess. But I'll plug the Focus podcast I do with David Sparks, because we nerded out about a lot of keyboard stuff in
Sure.
the members show there. So I'm curious, since I just had that conversation with David, like with the keycaps, did you get PBT? Are they ABS?
They're ABS.
Okay. Are they double shot?
No.
Okay. Because obviously this is way down the rabbit hole.
It is very far down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. I do think, I'm going to make a prediction right now. You are going to end up with eventually a new set of PBT keycaps. In what sort of profile did you get?
This is the Cherry
profile. Okay.
Yep.
So a non-cherry profile. If I had to guess, I would say either an MDA, which is what I've got on the Melgeek Big Bone keycaps that I've got.
Yep.
Or the MT3,
Yep.
which is the other one that nerds like us, seem to really like.
Yep. It's true.
And you will upgrade your switches. That's what I got in my hot swappable K8 at the beginning too, is the Browns.
Yeah.
But I did eventually put in new ones, Holy Pandas from Drop, which are like an upgraded tactile switch. I know that's what you like too.
Right.
So you will get another tactile switch, but I'm gonna say maybe 3 to 6 months before you are unsatisfied with the with the Browns.
Sure. I don't know if I'm going to, because here's the key, and here's the kicker. Not everyone realizes that a lot of, and you've probably noticed this too, because you've had both a DOS and a Keychron.
Mm-hmm.
People don't realize that the structure of it changes the way the switches operate. Or I shouldn't say the way they operate. It changes the way they feel. And having the Cherry Browns on this DOS as opposed to the Gateron Browns on the Keychron, I know a lot of people prefer the Cherries over the Gaterons. That seems to be a fairly common opinion. But at this moment, that keyboard, the Keychron, I'll take over this DOS any day.
Yes, absolutely. Did you
And
get the aluminum frame?
Yes. And
Yeah,
I think that's
why.
why. It's
Yep.
heavier. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't ring like this one does. I do know, knowing the way that I type, like I like that cherry profile on it, but I'm not against going to like an MT3. Again, this is like Carly saying in the chat, this is a whole nother language.
It's true.
I don't know about swapping keycaps though for PBT, because like, yes, it's a different material. Yes, you can go double shot and get them to be nicer and such, but like I get that the ones I have will shine after a while. People talk about that.
That's no big deal.
Yeah, it's a fairly cheap set of keycaps that I've put on it in regards to
exactly
keycaps. But here's the kicker, and this is why I do that. Joe types on a Dvorak layout, which means that your standard QWERTY layout keyboard keycaps I cannot use.
Yep.
So whenever I'm trying to purchase said keycaps, I always will have to purchase 2, sometimes 3 different sets of keycaps to get one keyboard functional. So that gets pricey.
That is pricey. That's not just Dvorak though. I mean, that's the way keycaps, the keycap group buys work. You got to buy like the alphas, and then like the 10 key lists that I've got. You've got the alphas, and then you've got the modifier keys, and then because I use it with a Mac, you can get like separate Mac modifiers, but not all the modifiers. So you got to get both of those.
Right.
And then usually there's like a separate set for the function keys, and it adds up, but it does make a big difference. And you already told me you like the stability of the aluminum frame. So if you get PBT keycaps, that will make it feel even more solid. This way you'll try mine and you'll be like, oh, that's nice, I need to get some.
What I'm actually looking at doing is not, I think before I would swap to PBT or put in Holy Pandas or Glorious Pandas, or which I think what you have is actually Glorious Pandas. There are 2 different types. Holy Pandas is technically the vintage put together versions. So if you bought new ones, I think they're technically Glorious Pandas.
If you buy them from Drop, they basically go through the process, repackage them, of combining the 2 sets together, because it's one, I forget the specifics, but it's one set of stems and one set of something else, and it's like
the
a
casings,
Franken switch.
Yep, it is. It's which is why it's fairly expensive in the world of switches. But anyway, what I'm getting at is I've looked at purchasing a PCB, the plate, the whole thing, and just custom building one. That's what I'm debating doing, because for the cost, for me, whenever I'm doing all of this, it's expensive enough that I might as well just custom build what I want. And you can get one that's significantly heavier, has a brass plate in the back of it, and it just sits super, super nice. So anyway, keyboards.
I'm very happy for you. It looks really nice. I don't think you're done. That's all.
No, I don't intend to be done. I just know, like, the keycap thing, last thing I'll say, I looked at whenever I was looking at doing this, the Drop had the Apple, what was the 1983? What was
the extended 2048. Yep.
Yes, there you go. They had those available. I could get everything I wanted in that. You want to take a crack at what it was going to cost me to do that?
Probably about $80, $90, because that's what it cost me.
210.
Oh my goodness.
That's what it was going to cost me to get what I needed. Because I had to buy so many of the subsets in order to get just a standard 10 keyless setup in Dvorak with the. Now, granted, I wanted some of the colored function keys and stuff around it.
Yeah.
So I wanted those, but yeah, it was going to be over $200 time I got it all put together. It's like, I can't justify that one.
Not yet, anyways.
Nope. That's next week.
All right. Well, we can move on, but we don't really have any follow-up, so figured we'd nerd out about keyboards for a little while. I can mention real quickly, I had a couple that I mentioned in the last episode that I didn't really have anything specific I was going to do with. I was just messing around with the way that I was journaling, but was pretty happy with the way that it was working. So I mentioned like using different colored highlights for different journal entries. I never
Sure.
figured out a way to do this. I'm not doing this. What I'm doing is working great. I'm going to keep doing stuff in Rome. I'm going to keep using the journal entries. I'm going to keep doing the gratitude. I'm going to
Sure.
keep doing the daily questions. Yeah, I've messed with this enough. I'm just going to lean into what's working. So
Sure.
And you did not have any action items, so I think that means we are ready to talk about today's book, which I'm a little bit nervous about. This book is Discipline Equals Freedom by Jocko Willink. We read Extreme Ownership, another Jocko book. We both really liked it. I think we both rated it 5.0. This book is good. We also read this the week that the government was almost overthrown in the U.S.
It's true.
So that made it a little bit tricky with all, because he's an ex-Marine. There's obviously a lot of military language
Navy
in
SEAL.
this book. Yes, you're right. Navy SEAL. Correct. Thank you for pointing that out.
People will point that one out right
that's
away.
That's a big difference. Big difference. You're right. And yeah, so I don't know. Did you have the same sort of reaction when you were going through this? Like maybe 6 months ago, this would have been an easier read, but kind of the tone that he uses throughout, I don't know. It kind of left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth, to be honest. But I don't think that's his fault.
Yeah, I can't say it struck me that way at all.
Okay.
I have a tendency to compartmentalize quite a bit. So I shouldn't say quite a bit. I do that on occasion. And then in this case, I did. And I can't say that I had, like, as I was watching what was going on in the Capitol, it was more like my perspective was, really, people? Come on.
Yeah.
And reading this, I was very focused on me, not necessarily other people with it.
Yep. Which is his intent. So
yeah, so I think that's probably why it didn't really hit me that way. So
okay.
It didn't leave a bad taste in my mouth. I have a lot of, like, I've got my notes here. I don't normally share these, but here you go. I got my bank of notes. Maybe I should share these on the club. That just occurred to me.
Do it.
These, I don't know if you can read it or not, but I have, what is it, number 1 on this list. Of course, a military dude will tell me to use discipline. That was my first note on this book.
Yep. We'll get into that in a little bit here, but I will just point out a couple of these chapter titles, for lack of a better term. Basically, every 2 pages is a chapter. It's kind of like the Seth Godin, the creative version of Discipline by a Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
It's that approach to the topic. It's well done, which we'll get into the specifics here, but some of these chapters are like draw fire, the war path, destroyer mode, scorched earth. I mean, so know that going in, if that's going to bother you, maybe you don't want to pick this one up.
Yep.
But I do agree with you that I think I'm able to distill the message that he's talking about and kind of look past some of that stuff.
Sure.
Because what he's got to say is pretty good. I think it's different than Extreme Ownership, that's for sure.
Yep.
It's basically all Jocko. It's all like his little bits of wisdom, and the book is organized into really 4 different sections with a 5th that's the appendix. So I put it in the outline, but I don't think we'll really spend a whole lot of time there. Part 1 is thoughts. Part 2 is actions. Part 3 is not labeled Part 3, but it's fuel, feeding the machine. Part 4, repair and maintenance, injury prevention and recovery. And then Part 5, that's the appendix. That's all of the workouts that he recommends.
I want to point out real quick before you get too far, just off of those titles, I think he intentionally chose not to go Part 3, Part 4, because in his mind he's talking about thoughts that then drive actions. And then he's got the fuel, repair and maintenance, and then the appendix. And I think those last 3 pieces are like an augmentation to Part 2.
I agree with you. However, the format of the book itself, like the section titles, look exactly the same. They're a 2-page spread with a big title, with the what's going to be covered next. And so there isn't a clear classification. Like if you're going to do a standard outline, like this one is under this one.
Right.
But that's the impression I got too when I was going through it. So yeah. But
How
for
long
the
did it
sake
take you
of
to read this?
not long at all.
This was a very quick one for me. I actually flipped through the entire book this morning before this, just as a refresher, because it's been, I don't know, a while back now since I finished reading it. So I wanted to bring it back in my mind. And it only took about 20 minutes to flip through it all and have it all recur, where it normally would take me about an hour to do something like that, which is why I don't normally do it.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very quick one.
It's also a very beautiful book. If you can describe a military book with a bunch of pictures of guys yelling at you, it's beautiful. But it is this black and silver. This is like an embossed cover. It's kind of like a cloth cover, and then all of the pages have their full bleed pages, and they have the block lettering, which kind of fits the military aesthetic, and then different pictures that they use for the background. My favorite one of those is, I think it's Put Down the Donut, where it's Jocko like standing there with his arm like pointing at somebody, like he's yelling at you. But it's very visually interesting, and I feel like it really fits the message that he's trying to get out, which is all about discipline. There's some interesting stuff in here because he specifically speaks to some things that we have heard in the productivity space for many years, and he's like, no, that's wrong. And I don't think I believe Jocko, but we'll talk about some of that stuff.
Sure.
So let's jump in here with part 1. We'll break this down and talk about the different parts. I've jotted down some bullet points under each one of these because, again, these chapters are basically 2 pages, a lot of times, sometimes 3, sometimes 1, with some text on the page. And it's not even like you would typically read text in a printed book. It's kind of artistically designed. He's putting the words different places, making stuff bigger so that it pops. And it's almost like you're reading a visual of a podcast. Maybe that's where a lot of this stuff came from. I don't know. I don't listen to the Jocko podcast. I know some people
I don't
do.
either.
Yeah. But so this first section, if you look at the MindNode file for this is like 3/4 of the MindNode file. It's this one section. So there's the MindNode file is the first branch is orange. So there's a lot of orange in this one. But I grabbed a couple things here that kind of jumped out to me. And I think there's some topics here that we can kind of dissect. And I really don't have like a specific direction for this. I kind of want to see where this is going to go, but obviously the place to start here, because the title is Discipline Equals Freedom, is to talk about discipline itself. And he defines it very first chapter, the way of discipline. He says that the shortcut is a lie, there is no easy way, and that discipline is the root of all good qualities. You're going to hear that theme over and over as you go through this book. Doesn't matter what you feel like, just shut up and do it. On one hand, I don't really like that, but on the other hand, I feel like maybe that's what I needed. Like as I'm going through this and he's telling me to get up early and stuff like that, I'm like, hey, yeah, you know what? I should get up earlier. So maybe it's effective. I don't know. What was your response to this?
The thing that kept going through my head was the Nike slogan, just do it.
Yeah.
I had that recurring through my brain the entire time I read this. I have kind of a split opinion on this, partially because, and you and I were talking about this beforehand. So yesterday I formally had my ADD diagnosed, and in the middle of experimenting on medication with it, which is why today might be interesting. But flipping through that this morning, being on medication for that, it hit me very differently than it did when I first read it. Because when I first read it, I was like, dude, you don't know my brain. This doesn't work. You can't just tell me to just get up and go. Like, just do the thing you got to do. Like, that doesn't work. So I was very frustrated with him when I did that when I went through it the first time. And when I flipped through it this morning, I remember thinking, being on medication at the time, was like, maybe that would work. Like, I don't know. So I'm not real sure my opinion on this at the moment, because yes, that changes things. But I know that when I have people say, just don't do it. Yes, I get that can work for some people, but and at the same time, he talks about excuses. Like, there's always something you bring up. It's like, well, no, it's not going to work that way because of X, Y, and Z. Like, the donut just looks good. It's like, no, don't eat it. Grow up. Like, that's essentially his message. So if you need a kick in the pants and you need a book to just motivate you, like, this is it. Like, this is just, especially this first section, like, motivate, motivate, motivate. That's what this is.
What do you think about the value of that approach for where we're at right now? I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff happening. We're still in the COVID times. And I know when that all started, it was a shock to a lot of people. A lot of people, even if you were working from home, you got to figure things out because now everybody's at home with you all the time. And I remember doing a webinar with Sean Blanc when that started, back to basics, because everything that you knew was overnight wrong. And I remember Sean sharing during that he felt that even though he had all this stuff dialed in and his day-to-day didn't really change, that he was 75% effective from where he was prior.
Sure.
And I feel like when that happened, a lot of people just needed some permission not to be productive. Jocko obviously would completely disagree with that.
Correct. Yeah, he would tell you that's a complete fail.
Yep. So what do you think is the right approach here? Is it, you know what, just take it easy and eventually things will figure themselves out? Is it, no, you just got to shut up and do it like Jocko's saying? Is it something in the middle?
It's a good question. My sense is it's somewhere in the middle. But I think if you were to... This is the issue. When you tell people you can go into the middle, or if you tell people it's okay to be unproductive in this period, you're giving them an excuse to not do things.
He talks to that specifically. He's like, the problem with once is that it's never just once.
Correct.
It's a slippery slope.
So that's the issue that comes up here. So you give people permission whenever you say you can do something in the middle. You don't have to go to the extreme of what Jocko is going to. I don't think that's bad for everybody. But I think this is where the value of the book comes in too. Mm-hmm. Because you have him telling you, get off the couch, get up at 4 a.m, do your massive workout in the morning, learn Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and pick up a handgun. Like, these are the things that we'll get to that. But he's telling you to keep going, whether you want to or not. I feel fine. Like, that's another thing. So I get his perspective. As far as what I would do, like, this is not something I would write, not something I would necessarily promote, like this level of get stuff done. But at the same time, like, I'm very grateful for having read this too.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is exactly what we're talking about. It is very motivating. It makes you want to go do stuff. Doesn't really matter what it is. The one thing, like, one of the things that I struggled with this, and he does address it in some places here and there, but the vast majority of this motivation and the discipline that he's talking about involves physical actions.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily thinking work. It's physical work that he talks about almost all. Even the pictures that are the backdrop for the words on the page that you were talking about, they are all 100% involving a gym in some form. Did you catch that? Like, there are times when he's like yelling, but if you pay attention in the background, he's at a gym when that all happens. So all of the photos here are from a gym. So I kind of get, like, the part of this that kind of frustrated me was that this is geared almost exclusively toward exercise. He doesn't say that, but the tone is that.
It definitely is that. You're right. And I think his approach is that if you take care of the body, if you push yourself physically to become strong and you discipline yourself to eat the right things, then that is going to affect all the other areas. He does talk about how the mind is affected by the body, but it's not a huge emphasis. You're right. It's easy to lose the forest through the trees. The thing I'm struggling with, Funky Mosquito talks about this in the chat, mentions that they like Marshall Goldsmith's Daily Questions because you can have a poor day without it being so binary. There's actually a chapter in here called The Binary Code.
Yes, I was
and
going
he
to bring that
says
up.
there isn't anything in between. It's just yes or no. And I have that same thought of like, this feels very different than a lot of the stuff that we have read. And part of me wants to just tell Jocko, hey, lighten up, buddy. Don't you know where we find ourselves right now? But then every time I had that thought, I'm like, you know what? I think he's right. As much as I don't like it, I think he's right. I think he's very in your face, very direct and confrontational in his message. But I don't think he's wrong in a lot of what he says.
Yeah.
Especially when he says stuff like willpower isn't real. You just do it and then the willpower comes. You know, we read The Willpower Instinct. We've heard forever that willpower is a finite resource and you got to conserve it. And this is why Steve Jobs wore the same thing every day, yada, yada, yada. Like,
Yep.
I've been in that place where I know he's right. Like if I just do the thing, whether I feel like it or not, it becomes easier to just continue to do the thing. So part of this, I'm reading it and I'm hearing him and I like want to argue with him, but it's a book. Like I can't really argue with him. It's not going to do anything. And then part of me is like, you know what? If you were to argue against this, you're really just hurting yourself anyways. So just shut up, like he says, and do the thing.
Right. I think you maybe have to come at this from a different angle too. So there are a lot of people who are considered quote unquote successful. Define that however you like, whether that's spending time with family every day or releasing content every 30 seconds or, you know, whatever successful is. You can find people who have done that or who have been in those shoes, and then you can pay attention to what they do day to day and how they think. Like generally you can learn how they think about things. If you find the people who are doing the thing you want to do, determine what their mindsets are, their mental models, teaser, to something, you can start to adopt those. If you consider that and think about what Jocko is doing here, think about the lifestyle and the things that he does. So he's a motivator, as Mosquito is saying in the chat. I think he has a supplements business, so that might be involved here as well. So
he actually doesn't talk about supplements in the book, though. He talks about the diet that he recommends, the caveman diet, which we'll get to.
Yep. So look at Jocko's life and the things that he does, or in this case, take a look at the life of Navy SEALs after they've left military world. And once they have come back to civilian life, what are the things that they generally do? And if those things are things that you aspire to, the motivation and the way that Jocko thinks is exactly what you need. You see what I'm saying? Like if that's the lifestyle that you want to pursue, I'm trying to remember, I ran across this on the UgMonk site, Jeff Sheldon, because Jeff Sheldon's actually coming to Analog Joe here in February, which will be fun.
Nice.
So he's going to talk us through his analog card system. Anyway, I was looking through their site, and he has that classic story of the Chinese fisherman that had caught tuna and was coming back, and he had only caught so much for his family for the day. because he wanted to go home and spend time with his kids, sleep late, sip on wine all afternoon. Like, these are the things that he wanted to do. But the businessman says, you know, you could go catch a whole bunch. You could earn a lot of money. He goes back and forth with this fisherman and says, essentially, well, if I do all that and I make all this money, then what? It's like, well, once you've spent all your extra time earning all this money, once you're done with that, you can sleep in late and you can spend your afternoon sipping wine and go home to the kids at night. It's like, well, that's what I'm doing now. Like,
yeah.
So it's that mindset too. So depending on which side of the spectrum you want to sit on, I think you have to decide if you want to dive in deep with what Jocko is saying here, or if you want to back off from that a bit. If you want to go to bed early and sleep late and not be up at 4:30 a.m. and take a picture of your watch like Jocko does every day. If you want to, I'm not kidding, check out his Instagram. So if you want to do that, go for it. I think that's a bit extreme for me. I don't think I'm going to go down that road, but I can see why some people do, because again, that lifestyle is one that I think a lot of people would aspire to. Is this making sense to you? Because I feel like I'm kind of going on.
It is. I think maybe there is a version of this, though, that is general enough to say this is the way. Maybe it's not getting up at 4:30, but maybe it is going to bed earlier, getting up earlier than you currently are. I do think there's a lot of stuff in here that rings of truth to me. Like on page 39, he talks about how the people who are successful decide they are going to be successful. Now, he's very goal driven. I'm not a huge fan of goals in the traditional sense of the word, but really what he's talking about here is like a vision and values that you are working towards. And that I agree with. You know, if you have a strong vision for what you want your life to look like, then show up every day, have a bias towards action, which is essentially what he's saying, but in different ways, and maybe a little bit more rough than some people would prefer.
Sure.
But that seems like great advice to me, to be honest. And some of the stuff he said, I think, brings a different way of looking at it that I hadn't really thought of it that way before. Like, he talks about focus, he talks about motivation, but the way that he talks about it is a little bit different. Like, there was a chapter in here called Not Feeling It. And this is, again, the bias towards action idea. And he says, do it anyway, even if you're just going through the motions. That's kind of like James Clear, Atomic Habits. You know, don't miss a day. The bad workouts are the important ones, sort of a thing. It doesn't just apply to workouts, though. And then he talks about procrastination. And this I thought was kind of brilliant. This is one of my big aha moments from this book. He says, procrastinate on taking a break. I never really thought of it that way. Usually when I think of procrastination, it's like, well, I have this article to write because I have this deadline that's due, and I'm dragging my feet because I'm not feeling it. And he's saying, well, flip that on its head, basically. And when you're not feeling it and you want to take that break, procrastinate on taking the break. Develop that bias towards action so that it's so strong that it compels you to just do it anyways. And then if you procrastinate on taking the break and say, well, I'll do this first and then I'll take the break if I want to. I'll take the break tomorrow. You know, tomorrow you're not going to feel like it. Tomorrow You're going to want to show up and do the thing because that's consistent with your character and who you are. I mean, this reminds me a lot of habits. I think it's F.M. Alexander, that the quote that people don't decide their futures, they decide their habits, and their habits determine their futures, or some version of that. You know, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. I mean, I don't think he's wrong. I just am struggling with, like, how do I apply this? Because as we'll talk about in the next couple sections, like some of the specifics here, you know, I'm not a Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy.
No, I'm not either.
But I don't know. I do think there's a lot in this thoughts part, which if you were to read just one section of this book, this would be the one to focus on, because there's things that you will, especially if you're familiar with a lot of the stuff that we read for Bookworm, this is going to say some of those concepts in different ways, and it's going to cause you to kind of get a more complete picture of some things. I feel like the focus section is another one that I really liked. He says, focus comes easy in combat because the battle's right in front of you. I agree with that. That makes so much sense. If a fight is brought to you, like, you're gonna confront it, you're gonna do the right thing in that specific situation. So as it pertains to the things that you say you want to do, then maybe you do need to have his attitude of the war path, and every day, like, you show up ready to fight, but not, I don't know, like, that's the part that kind of made this hard to digest for me, is like, I don't view showing up and doing my morning routine as fighting the enemy.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just because I've done it long enough that it's easier for me to do that. I'm working on a update to the best habit tracking app pick for the Sweet Setup. I think I shared on Twitter a screenshot. I've got a whole page full of habit trackers.
Oh, that's easy. Bullet journal.
That didn't work for me. I'm back on streaks, which I never turned off the automations that I had there for, like, Bible reading and prayer, because I use apps for those things. And so when I went back into streaks to test things, my streak is at like 467 days in a row.
Nice.
So
nice.
I've developed some of this stuff, and I have some momentum already. I'm trying to disconnect from that, though, and put myself back in the shoes of somebody who's coming to this for the first time. Like, how would they respond to Drill Sergeant Jocko yelling at him, screaming at him? I don't know. But that doesn't mean I think that he's off base with any of this stuff in this first section anyways.
The comment he makes about when you're in battle, the task is right in front of you, so it's easy to focus. I've been realizing this lately. So I grew up on a farm, and it occurred to me, like, when I worked on the farm, I never had an issue deciding what to do and what came next. It was very plain. And I think that's partially because the length of time it takes to do each task. Harvest a field. That could take anywhere from 3 hours to 3 days to do that one task. Now, of course, you've got some maintenance and, starting up, operating, unloading. You've got all those little tiny things, but it's a whole process that just repeats. So harvest that field is a very long task. Send that email is a very short task, and you could have 100 of those in one day. But I'm like, when you're on a farm, like, you may have one task and you're going to do that one task all day long. But when we work on computers and the type of thing that we do, like, you can do so many things because they're so short. And I wonder if that's partially what makes some of these things difficult to focus on. But I don't think he dove into it deep enough on that part. Like, that aspect of it, of how do you translate focus from a battlefield to a corporate desk? Like, that translation doesn't happen. You have to try to make those connections in your brain on your own. So I wish he would have made that connection. That's why I was saying earlier, like, this talks a lot about physical actions. Like, when you're on a battlefield, it's all physical. Yes, you're making some decisions, but those are small pieces of what's going on. A lot of what's going on is physical. So I really wanted that translation. It just wasn't there.
You're right, it's not there. I think I'm a little bit different, though. Like, I don't want Jocko telling me how to apply battle principles to the knowledge worker.
That's very fair. Yep.
Solid. I'll listen to Seth Godin for that sort of stuff.
Yes. Here's how you handle this corporate meeting. Make sure you bring your jiu-jitsu black belt and make sure you got your handgun ready and you're set. Like, that's how this is gonna go.
And I remember when we read Extreme Ownership, because that book, there's the story from combat and then the leadership principle, which leadership, again, is a big thing here. There's actually a chapter here in this first section called Leadership Vacuum. And basically it talks about how, or what happens when no one rises up to lead. That's a leadership vacuum. And he says that can happen in your own head as well when you don't make a decision. So this is kind of like personal leadership here.
Right.
But and then the last part of the chapters in Extreme Ownership is the application to business. And I remember reading some of those business stories, and I was like, this doesn't seem as strong as the other parts of the book. And I get why they did it. Like, that's what the business they were trying to build once they came back and were no longer in the Navy SEALs. So I think that does work for a lot of people, but there isn't a direct translation between those. So like they probably work very successfully with some types of business people, but not all types of business people, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So you get a less complete application of it in a different, as soon as you change the arena. So I'm personally okay with him sticking to like the physical exercise, personal leadership side of this, not speaking to the desk jockeys or the knowledge workers. But I can see how, to your original point, if you are in one of those categories, you do read just this book in isolation and you're like, well, what do I do with this? And to be honest, I don't really know exactly what I'm going to do with this. I've got a couple of action items, which we'll get to, but I don't think they are knowledge work related.
Yeah.
So
that's true. Because I think you're absolutely right. There are some things that I would want Jocko's advice on. I'd take his advice on diet and exercise any day of the week. But showing me how to manage my code projects.
Yeah.
Maybe? I mean, he needs to do some talking, like a lot of talking, to get me to the point where I feel like I would trust his opinion on how that works. And maybe that's because I don't want to listen to him on this. That's the other side of that coin, is maybe I'm saying we don't, or both of us maybe, we don't want to listen to him in that knowledge work arena because he's right and we don't want to admit it.
Yep. No, that's true. So on that topic, I think there's something in the middle. So you mentioned the farm example and how like you can have a task where you're working all day, and then as soon as you get that task done, it is instantly clear what the next thing is for you to do. And it is
Correct.
not a 5-minute task. But for a lot of us, that's what we do, is we break things down into the smallest possible steps, and then we have all this technology which makes stuff super, super efficient, but we don't show up and do the work anyways. So
Right.
we are the limiting factor, which again, like, I don't want him to tell me how to plan my projects and use OmniFocus, but he doesn't have to. He's already told me, like, you got to have that bias towards action. That's the next bullet I jotted down. There's a couple different chapters here that deal with just begin, show up every day, make sure that you take action. And they're all basically saying that same thing. Like, you got to show up consistently. You got to do it all the time. And that is not hard to translate for a knowledge worker. Those articles that you have to write or whatever you have to do, just stop dragging your feet, sit down at your keyboard and write the dumb thing. And I don't know, when I say that to myself, I'm like, yeah, you already know what to do. Just do it.
Which is his point, really.
Yep. So even though he's not a knowledge worker, he doesn't need to know all those details. He just needs to get my butt in the chair, my hands on the keys, and get me moving, which that part he's really good at.
Which I think is the value of the book, honestly.
Yep. Yeah, so this first chapter, or this first section, though, this theme comes up a bunch of different times. He says it a bunch of different ways. I don't think he's wrong for doing that, though. Whatever it is that finally like makes you take action, that's exactly what you need. So in the begin chapter, he talks about don't reason with weakness, just get up and go. And towards the end, he's got one, action you. He says thoughts are not enough. You must take action. The one thing stopping you is you. He's right. Guilty.
What do you do with that, though, when someone's like, the only reason you're not getting that done is because you're not doing it? Okay, well, you're not wrong.
That's the hard part, yeah, because no one likes to hear that stuff. But the minute you become okay with the fact that you are the one holding you back, you now have the power and the ability to change it too. As long as you view the fact that you're being held back by somebody else, external circumstances, then you're just kind of stuck.
Yes. Yeah. The moment you have to take personal responsibility for it, you can act on it and change it.
Yeah.
Did you notice, like, there's in this thoughts section, I felt as though this section could easily be titled mindset, but I don't think he wanted to use that term.
Yeah.
Because of the book mindset. But a lot of that, I had growth mindset in the back of my head.
Yep.
Very frequently as I was going through this. Did you have that connection as you read it?
Totally. And he doesn't use the term growth mindset at all, but there's a couple sections specifically where he talks about like questioning everything and constantly be learning. And that's immediately what I thought of as growth mindset.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a very prevalent theme, just not called out. I don't know that it needs to be, though.
And that, I don't think it needs to be, but that is a good distinction that a lot of this is really just trying to shift your perspective. And some of that stuff is really good. One of my favorite chapters from this whole book is the section actually titled Good. Do you remember this one?
Titled Good? No, not off the top of my head.
It's basically his response whenever anything goes wrong.
Okay.
And so people will come to him and they'll say, you know, this happened, that happened, the other thing. And the projected response for a leader in that position is like, well, if I go tell my leader this bad news, then they're going to get upset. Like, why don't you fix it? Whatever. His response was always one word. It's good. And the takeaway from that is that now you know what doesn't work, so now you can try something else. And he's got a big long list of examples where like this thing happened, good, now you have the ability to try something else. You didn't get the promotion, good, you have the ability to develop your skills further until you do. And I like that whole section, and that was one of the things that really stood out to me. And I feel like that section alone, that is probably enough of a reason to read the entire book.
Sure.
But it's really good, and it really jives with the personal responsibility stuff we were just talking about. And another form of this is like the darkness, because this talks about how storms are going to rise. Don't let them consume you. As long as you keep fighting, then you win. The only real defeat is if you surrender, if you give in to your circumstances. And again, like he's talking about this from a physical exercise point. So you're giving in if you don't get up at 4:30 and do Brazilian jiu-jitsu in his mind. But for me, you know, if I'm not getting up at 6 a.m. and writing,
Right.
that's my version of that.
Sure. I think, you know, this whole good thing is interesting because essentially what he's saying is that when you have bad things happen, or you perceived bad things, when you have perceived bad things happen or things that happen that you don't want, that is good because now you know your mission. It's like defining what your next project or task is. That's, at least that was my takeaway with it. Like that seems to be what he's getting at there. So yes, I didn't recall this section when you brought it up, but I did once you started talking about it.
Sure.
But that's my perspective. I think whenever you see something like that, our tendency is to either go down the path of woe is me and wallow.
Yep.
When you could turn it on its head. You know, that's similar to shoot, I'm drawing a blank on it. The Ryan Holiday book we did early on.
Obstacle is the way.
Obstacle is the way. There you go. That's kind of the mindset.
Yeah.
There's when you see that you have something to overcome, you now have your mission.
True. Yeah. And kind of a thought that is coupled with that is the fact that your perspective determines whether you act, and what you say determines your perspective. So the other thing I had jotted down for this section is I feel fine, which this is the story behind this. Not every chapter has this, but this one did. When you were in training and something happened and they asked you, how do you feel? The only correct response was, I feel fine. And there were a couple of reasons for that. Number one, that even if you had like gotten knocked unconscious, you're going to say that and then you're going to believe it, and it's going to affect you it's going to affect how you act and how you think and how you see. But also the enunciation for I feel fine, having the say all those F sounds in a row, that was a little bit tricky to do if you didn't have control of all of your faculties. So just the fact that you're saying that phrase shows that you are in control of yourself. And then you say this, and even if you don't feel fine, the moment that you say it, you start to believe it, and it causes you to keep going. Which, he didn't get into the specifics of this, but I've read enough other books about Navy SEAL training and all the stuff that they go through to know that there are a lot of times when you don't feel fine.
Correct. You just internalize it and it never comes out. Yes.
Yep. And that was interesting to me, that the only thing that came out of your mouth, the only thing allowed to come out of your mouth essentially, is I feel fine. And it's kind of like a positive confession. And I do believe there's a lot of value in a positive confession. I don't like to say negative things. Specifically over my family, I think this is a really powerful concept that he's not talking about here, but it's kind of related to this, is if you're gonna continue to call your kids little monsters or little monkeys or whatever, like, that's what they're gonna act like. But if you say positive things over them, then they will internalize and they will believe that, and essentially you are painting a picture of what their future looks like, even though you don't realize it sometimes. So very important not to respond emotionally when you are in the parenting context there, but absolutely applies in the personal context as well. What are you saying about yourself? Do you believe that you aren't good enough, you aren't smart enough, you're not creative enough? Well, fine, you're not.
Right.
So
yeah, it's this is one of those, which comes first? Do you feel fine and then therefore you say I feel fine, or do you say I feel fine and thus you feel fine?
I can tell you which one I believe will lead to a higher quality of life.
Yes, absolutely. So I think, I'm not one that's going to, I don't think either of us are one that promotes the whole positive thinking almost cult. That's, if I believe it, it will happen. Like, that's another level of what we're talking about here. So I think that this is more of a very small, minor emotion stance, I think, is what we're getting at, which I definitely do hold to, because if I'm telling myself that I'm feeling terrible today, guess what? I feel terrible today. If I wake up and I'm thinking about how productive I'm going to be today, I'm usually significantly more productive that day. On a minute level, that does seem to be a thing that happens, and I think this is playing into that. When you tell someone, I feel fine, after something major just happened, you're setting yourself up to actually feel fine.
I think there is a cycle here, and so it's hard to say one causes the other, but I do think they impact each other. And you got to pick some point to interject some intentionality inside this cycle. The thoughts that you think, they're going to determine the words that you say, and that's going to determine the things that you do. And I do believe that is like a flywheel, which left unchecked, just living by default, is going to be pretty negative. I also really believe that words have power. And so words are a great place, I argue, for you to stick your hand in that fan and get it to stop, and then say, no, we're going to go the other way now.
Sure.
I do think that the words, like your perspective shift, makes it easier to act right. Now, a lot of what he's saying could also be interpreted the other way. Like, doesn't matter what you feel like, you just show up and do the thing, and that's going to impact your thoughts and your actions. And I think that's true too. But if I had to pick one as a place to start, it would be get a handle on your thoughts and get a handle on your words.
Very valid. I feel fine.
All right, there's lots of other stuff in here, but I think that's good enough for part 1. Let's go to part 2, which is significantly shorter. This is actions, and there are lots of different chapters in here, pretty much all related to physical stuff. There's a couple here related to things that we've talked about before, and so I wanted to touch on these. The first one is stress. He talks about good and bad stress. He talks about what happens when you feel stressed. Cortisol levels go high. Your immune system can become repressed if it's there for a long time. You got to be careful not to stress your body and mind too much because of that, but also you need stress in order to get better, in order to grow. I think this is absolutely true. I am curious, though, because this is a short little chapter. You have any insights on the distinctions there between good and bad stress?
Not specifically. I mean, people think of good and bad stress pretty commonly. I don't know that he has anything groundbreaking here, at least not to me, that I read. I mean, there are definitely things in life I've dealt with in the last 18, 24 months that I would term as both good and bad stress. But even the bad stressors I've learned a lot from. If I look at the results of said stress after having gone through them, I think you could potentially redefine some previously known bad stressors as good stressors.
Mm-hmm.
But that's learning from failures, most likely, in the vast majority of scenarios.
So when I read this section, I instantly thought of the conversation we had about hustle.
Oh, sure.
Because I think hustle is a version of good stress that can very easily become bad stress or overly done stress, and now you're on the verge of burnout. And again, he's not giving you, Jocko isn't any specific distinctions here between these two, but just the realization that not all stress is bad, I think is a big takeaway here. And the fact that you are feeling stressed doesn't mean that you should be looking for a way out of your current situation.
Right.
Now, lots of nuance there, which we're not qualified to talk about.
No, not even
so
close.
I don't, yeah. But I think that you can kind of figure this out for yourself. If you do need some professional help, then absolutely go and get it. But I think the general takeaway for most people is to at least recognize that not all stress is bad and start to ask yourself these questions about, like, well, where do I draw this line? What is the difference between this is something that is going to prod me to become a better version of myself than I would have in my default lazy state, and now it's getting unhealthy and it's chronic and it's affecting a bunch of other things negatively. Maybe that's the thing as I'm talking through this that you got to be looking at is what sort of effect that stress is producing in other things. It can be hard because it can be cumulative, but what is the cause and what is the effect of the processes and the systems that you have in your own life?
One of the things I would add to that, though, is if you do have bad stressors, yes, you can go down the path of trying to remove them. That's a definite thing you could do. At the same time, you can sometimes make the choice to not remove them intentionally. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, if I try to remove bad ones, yes, I can get the bad one out of my life. But at the same time, if I keep a bad stressor, I'm very likely to learn some pretty valuable things from it. Like, I've had a number of things that I would love to remove, some of which I can, some of which I can't, that I would consider are bad stressors in the realm of life. And I've specifically chosen not to remove them in the last probably 18 months again. So I can't say that those are all things you should be trying to extract. Sometimes you need to lean into them, even though you don't like them.
Exactly, which gets us back to his core message.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't really know what else to say to anybody who's still struggling with where that line is. You kind of have to find it for yourself. But I think the big thing for me as I read this is just to consider kind of what are the inputs that are producing the stress, and then what are the outputs? What's the fruit from that? I think it's fairly easy to see where, like, if you were working one-on-one with Jocko, he's going to get in your face. He's going to make you get up at 4:30. He's going to drag you to the gym, force you to do the workouts. And you could look at that, and none of that is going to be comfortable. None of that is going to be pleasant. But you do it for a couple of weeks, and you're going to start to see some results from it, right? And at that point, it's a lot easier to continue to show up every day because you're like, oh yeah, I guess this is working.
Right.
Sometimes there's not a instant, anyways, response from or connection from the input to the output. Sometimes it's a little bit delayed, which is why so many people have trouble with stuff like habits and New Year's resolutions and stuff like that. But I think if you have that perspective, you're constantly looking for those connections, you'll be able to find them.
For sure.
Which kind of leads us to the next one, which is the whole idea of sleep and getting up early. I'm not getting up at 4:30. What about you?
I used to be a 5 a.m. guy for a long time.
Yeah?
Yep. Years. I was a 5 a.m. person. There's even a blog post on my site about why get up at 5 a.m. I forget what it's titled, but it involves 5 a.m. and getting up early. Why get up early? Something like that. And I talk about being a 5 a.m. person. When I did that, I will say this. I accomplished a lot during that time and valued it very highly, not realizing that the migraine issue I was dealing with at the time was very directly connected to that. So
okay,
I was getting migraines once or twice a month at the time. And when I stopped trying to get up at 5 a.m. and I cut sugar and stuff out of my diet, migraines almost completely disappeared. I've had very few in the last 2 years since I've made that shift. And reading this, I know I can get up at 5 a.m. I know I can do that, and I know I can do it regularly. But I know I'm going to pay for it.
Well, I'm curious because you mentioned two things that you did at the same time,
Correct.
Which eliminated the migraines. So, because he talks about the sugar stuff too, and he mentions,
Yes.
What is he? He's got a chapter called "Sugar-Coated Lies" or something like that.
Yes.
He's very, very anti-sugar. He views
Yes.
food simply as fuel for doing what you need to do. Do you think if you decoupled those that you would still have the migraines?
I think that if I were to, like, what I've learned through some of the habit tracking and things I track in my notebook, I've learned that if I have bad sleep, that is a much bigger trigger for my migraines than sugar is. Now, granted, if I've had a lot of sugar and then I sleep poorly, almost guaranteed I'm going to have a migraine the next day. So that does happen. But I think that for me, I can introduce the sugar slightly and it's okay. But if I have 2 or 3 nights of bad sleep and then try to eat a piece of pie, that next day is going to be a fun one.
Sure. Well, you just answered my question because you've made a stronger connection to the lack of sleep than you have to the sugar. So,
yep. But when I was first able to get away from the migraines, I had removed both at the same time.
Sure. Gotcha. And that's the step I would advise anybody who is thinking about making these changes to do, is to do one thing at a time and figure out what are the things that are triggering the pain in your own life.
Yep. And it's so true. Having read this though, are you going to get up early?
Okay, so
Earlier?
let me share a little bit of context here. I have trouble with this section, and I'd couple these together, the getting up early and the sleep, because he talks about how, well, the way to get up early is simple. Just go to bed earlier.
Yes.
And then he even talks about how much sleep you really need. And that part I disagree with. And I am in a unique situation here because I have been diagnosed with epilepsy. One of the things that can trigger a seizure is a lack of sleep. I have not had a seizure in 20 years now. I'm going to keep it that way.
Sure.
And the way that I do that is I make sure that I get at least 8 hours of sleep per night. I don't
Sure.
always get 8 hours of sleep, but I do everything I can to set myself up for success. And if I don't get enough sleep, then I am going to take a nap the next day, or I'm going to go to bed early and I'm going to get more sleep because I'm not going to accumulate any of that sleep. That his whole tone is like, you need 7 hours tops and just push through it. The sleepiness will leave. And I'm like, no, the sleepiness will not leave because there's something else that may happen. So I am not going to take his advice on how much sleep I need. And that kind of changes all of the specifics about when to go to bed and when to get up.
Right.
That being said, like Awful Otter is mentioning in the chat, there is something to be said about having time to do things before other people are up. And with all of the stuff that we've gone through over the last year, my bedtime and my wake up time has slowly been creeping later. Part of that is 5 kids at home.
Yes.
And then you finally get everybody in bed and you're just like, okay, now we can finally have some time to ourselves, and you don't want that to end.
Yes. Next thing you know, it's 10 p.m., 10:30, sometimes 11. It's like, oh, but I can get so much stuff done. The kids are all down. Yep. And then they're up before you doing stuff for you in the morning.
Now, that being said, the beginning of this year, I fasted a little bit. I gave up coffee, which no caffeine, obviously easier to go to bed earlier. Found myself getting up earlier as a result. So I feel like I've kind of been working on a reset regarding my bedtime, wake up time anyways. And I do want to start getting up a little bit earlier. I'm thinking probably the optimal time for me is 6 a.m. Maybe if I can swing it 5:30, but I can't go to bed before the kids go to bed. So that's kind of like my hard boundary on the end of my day.
Right.
And we have actually, since everything got shut down, we did recalibrate even like the kids' bedtimes, and they do go to bed earlier than they used to. So kind of the whole family is working in this direction, but even so, like, I don't know. I've got a teenager now. I can't tell him to go to bed before 9 o'clock.
Right.
That's just,
right.
I gotta give him a little bit of freedom there too. So I don't know exactly what I'm going to commit to. I don't know exactly where this is going to land, but this is one of my action items, is to start getting up earlier.
Sure.
And I have kind of rethought the morning routine and how I enter my workday. And actually for the last week or two now, I have been getting up a little bit earlier, going through the morning routine, and then just like clicking right in because I know exactly what I'm going to be working on in the morning. Getting an hour, sometimes 2 hours worth of work done, and then going back upstairs and seeing that everybody is awake.
Yeah.
That is pretty great.
I've debated setting an alarm. I don't think I would set an alarm. I would be more focused on getting to bed on time because I don't use an alarm. I'm one of those, people who are able to do that. I know not everyone can. I think you're the same for the most part. But I have debated trying to make sure I'm out of bed at 6:15 or so. Right now, because I'm not getting to sleep till 10 or a little later, I've been sleeping till 6:30 pretty regularly. My kids get up at 7. So by the time I get up, get through a shower, and get myself dressed, they're up.
Yeah.
And that gets tough. There really isn't much of a morning routine outside of breakfast. Right. And then it's off to work. So there's not much there. there is time to, make sure I've got my bullet journal ready, but I do that with my kids at the breakfast table. So like there's some of that happens, but I've been debating trying to get up a little earlier, but I don't think I would be setting an alarm. I would be setting a bedtime, like getting to bed sooner if I can. But that's tricky.
Sure.
That's tough.
I have been
think so.
using the there's a haptic wake now for the alarm on the Apple Watch,
that.
which I think is kind of a happy medium between the wake up window and an audible alarm.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to feel it right away when I'm really in a deep state of sleep, but also it's not going to wake everybody else up. It seems to be working, and I think I'm probably going to continue to use that.
Sure.
I'm also going to try, I think, to get a workout in the morning. So the other thing, he's talking about in this section, he talks about the home gym and the workouts and stuff like this. So he mentions doing a workout right at the beginning. He mentions doing multiple workouts throughout the day, which at first when I read that, I'm like, who's got time for that? And then I'm like,
right.
wait, maybe I could make that work.
Nice.
Because you can't see in the video, but right behind me here is a weight bench, and I've got adjustable dumbbells literally in my office because there's nowhere else for them to go.
Right.
And one of the big things that came out of the last year, I made a point to get outside every day, and that meant that I was running or biking every single day, and a lot of days actually doing both. I loved the experience of that, and I want to keep that going. Obviously, it's pretty not great outside right now, so I still run outside a couple times a week. I'm not biking outside in the snow. I don't have one of those fat tire bikes.
Nice.
But I did look at my my fitness totals for the year using an app called Fitness Goals. It tallies everything up from your activities, workouts. And in 2020, I had 1,831 miles. No, wait, that's walking and running. Okay, so running, I had 558 miles from running workouts. Cycling, I had 1,230. Compare that to 2019. I had 500 running miles for workouts, and that was when I was training for a half marathon. I didn't actually get to do a half marathon last year. And cycling, I had 216. So I shattered this, and I've established this habit essentially already. And so if the stuff is in my house, why wouldn't I be able to keep this going?
Sure.
Which then he gets into like the home gym and the stuff that you need. I have a lot of this stuff already. One thing I think I will be looking at is getting an exercise bike or a rowing machine. He has stuff kind of in like the recommended order of what you should get, starting with just a pull-up bar. So I have most of the beginning stuff already, just like the free weights and the bench and all that stuff. But the rowing machine or something that I could do that's not like running outside. I don't have a treadmill, something I could do inside in the winter. That's kind of like a whole body cardio sort of a thing would be great. And I haven't even done any research, but I guess my action item is to look into this stuff. I don't know if I'm going to actually end up getting one of these machines or not. I have no idea how much they cost, but he's got me motivated to try it anyways.
Sure. All right, I need to pause for a second. I've got to use the restroom. Too much coffee. My apologies.
Awful lot. Or you're working out in the morning. What are you doing in the morning? Are you doing the weights? Are you doing cardio? I'm curious. Brazilian jiu-jitsu like Jocko? Concept 2. All right. I'll have to check that out. Just out of curiosity, what's so great about the Concept 2? Yeah, I guess CrossFit is both. Break something, you need to fly. Yeah, that is a risk. My second oldest got into jiu-jitsu before everything got shut down. He hasn't been able to do it since then. But I remember taking him to the place, and he's doing it for a couple of months, and then all of a sudden we show up one day and his teacher's in a sling.
Caught the very end of that. Teacher's in a sling?
Yeah, no, Awful Otter's talking about jiu-jitsu.
Oh, sure. See, I leave,
saying,
and then you start having fun conversations. Okay, exercise.
Yeah.
Do we need to do any clapping?
Sure. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
So, okay, I gotta get into it again. When I went through this section on home gym stuff, like the thing that stuck out in my mind is if you're familiar with Nerd Fitness, nerdfitness.com. Do you know this? You should definitely check them out if you don't. So nerdfitness.com has a body weight home workout system that you can do. I have a barbell downstairs and some free weights and such. So I have some of that here. I've done that beginner workout a number of times. The problem is the best time for me to do that is in the morning. And like I was talking about earlier, I'm usually waking up too late to do any of that. So that's part of why I would like to get up a little earlier so that I have time for that. But I mean, I don't see the need for a rowing machine or something like that. That's not something that I would use. Our friend of the show, Josh, has a really nice one, but to each their own. So there's a lot of things that you could do in this camp, but I find that just doing a free weight or a mostly body weight workout does fine for me. But I'm not huge into fitness and trying to do it to build a body image and stuff like that is not my intention at all. It's just mostly to keep me moving. So I don't know. I'll try to do that more often. Maybe that's an action item. I don't have anything actually written down here. I probably should be writing these, but if I'm going to do something that's probably it. I'm going to be trying to make sure I'm getting up early enough to do a workout and try to do that daily as an attempt to help my overall health for sure.
You better have an action item after reading a Jocko Willink.
I know, right? I definitely need to be writing these down for sure.
Yeah, so maybe we should talk about some of the thoughts around specifically our exercise routines. You kind of shared yours. You're going to use the Nerd Fitness style stuff. I've got I mentioned the free weights here in my office with the bench. And because I tend to time block specifically for exercise, that means that stuff actually has kind of gotten neglected a little bit. I still do it, just not as consistently as I was before. I've kind of gone the other way and done a lot more cardio, the exercise or the running and the biking. And so what I'm thinking is that stuff usually I time block later in the day. Like my favorite time to go for a run is about 10:30, 11 a.m. because I've put in some solid usually writing time before then, and I can push myself physically, come back and have lunch at that point, after I run. Usually it's 4 or 5 miles. And I think that I could definitely add some of the strength training stuff that I have not done as consistently at the beginning of my day if I started getting up a little bit earlier. And that would probably help get me moving and provide some focus benefits when I sit down to actually write. So I think I'm going to try to incorporate some of that stuff into my morning routine.
Makes sense.
And Otter's got me looking at these Concept 2 rowers now.
Don't do it.
I don't know how much I'm gonna be able to invest in this stuff. As I shared with you, just got a new guitar, so spent a bunch of money already. But
your monthly budget is blown.
Yeah, but I do think that this is worth considering because he does make the point that the best, like, where should you start when it comes to exercise? He's like, just do anything. So
right.
He's got a bunch of stuff that he recommends and like the martial arts in the order that you should do them, but I kind of feel like that's sort of optional. Am I wrong in thinking that?
I think he wants you to just do something. Like, yeah, he wants you to see, this is the section where he wants you to do exercise. He wants you to build martial arts into this in some form and recommends Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a beginning point and then working your way towards Muay Thai. So, like, there's, I don't know why I know this stuff, like how to pronounce it and stuff. So anyway, I think there's a lot of potential in what he's saying, and I'm not telling him he's wrong. But again, like the lifestyle that we were talking about earlier, that concept of if you want to look and live the way that U.S. Navy SEALs look and live when they come back to civilian life, if you want to be like that, you need to do this, I would say. Like, it would be very hard for me to find someone who doesn't need to do that, if that's what you want. I don't have an interest in building my body and developing those skills. So that's not something I'm going to pursue. If you told me that you wanted to find a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class or group locally, I would applaud you, Mike. But no, I'm not taking the time. Like, that's a lot of time to devote, I feel, to something that I don't think I'm going to gain much value out of. Personally. Now, I could be completely wrong because there's something about it I don't see, but that's not something I'm going to pursue.
Sure. I'm not committing to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, although I see a path forward for that because one of my sons is interested in it already, so...
Oh, fun.
We'll see. Let's go to the next section, which is fuel, feeding the machine. I'm not sure I have a whole lot to say here. This can be easily summarized, I think. He talks about how your body is constantly trying to maintain balance. One of the ways that it does that is by creating glucose or blood sugar when you eat a lot of carbohydrates. So his basic advice is cut out that stuff, and then your body will start burning fat for energy instead of storing it. And I can't argue with that. However, his paleo caveman diet does not necessarily appeal to me. I will say, if I had read this prior to doing Brainwash, I probably would have tried at least some of this, but I'm pretty happy with how I've dialed things in. I have a salad like every day now, which is a big deal for me.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, so I'm happy with the changes that I made, and I don't feel like I need to disrupt this at the moment.
I think, having read Brainwash, like this diet, as far as the technicals go, is almost identical to what the Perlmutters recommend in Brainwash. So
okay.
The kicker here is that Jocko distills it much further and makes it easier to understand.
Yeah, he's got a list of this is what you can eat, this is what you can't eat.
Correct. And they're like broad categories and such. Namely, don't eat anything processed and stay away from grains. Like, that's really his perspective on it.
And potatoes.
Yep.
And beans, I guess.
But the thing, like, the only one, like, with my diet, the only thing that's really different from what he recommends is I do have grains. Granted, it's almost always whole grains. They're not refined or stripped of any nutrients in any form. So I'm pretty particular about that. But outside of that, like you're saying, it's a pretty straightforward. He wants you to eat wild stuff, essentially. Like whole products and wild stuff.
Some wild stuff. Yeah. He does mention fungi, so mushrooms. I'm sure that made you happy.
Very happy. Bring on the
Roots.
Yes. My Takian team.
I think the big takeaway for me is this: just try to stick to your diet and don't eat the junk. He would say it this way: stay 100% clean, don't make any exceptions, put down that donut.
He really doesn't like donuts, does he? Well,
he
really likes donuts.
like
he
donuts.
just doesn't want you to eat them.
Very true. So yeah, I think whatever diet you're gonna land on, just make sure that you're viewing it as a way to keep you going. It's not a source of happiness, so to speak, which I think maybe is where I get off with some of this stuff, is like, you don't need the pizza and the stuff like that just in order to change your mood. Actually, that stuff has a negative effect to it, which is really what he's focused on in all of this stuff. So viewing food as simply fuel and not an experience, so to speak, which is easier to do when you eat every meal at home.
True that.
He also talks about fasting, which I mentioned. This is something that I just did and I plan on doing more frequently. He says it very directly in typical Jocko style. He says, you don't have to eat. And there's lots of benefits that come from fasting, like recalibrating your hunger demand, and it helps you exercise your will, which is tied obviously to the big idea of discipline. So simply that, in terms of like an exercise for developing that, I think is valuable. But I think that there's a bunch of other benefits that he didn't even really speak to with this. So reminder for me to practice this more regularly, and something I want to work into my routine, although I haven't figured out quite how often I want to do that yet.
Mosquito has a point that I want to bring up, because I have this written down as a point that I want to bring up too, in that, now that we're at the end of this section, fuel feeding the machine. We're addicted to sugar. Here's the diet you should have. You should fast. The problem I have is that this is purely food is a tool to be used and not an experience to enjoy. If I were to take the mindset that food is merely fuel, I believe my wife would throw a fit. My wife does 99% of the cooking in our household. She is huge into cast iron, cooking things the way that they taste best, old world cooking styles. These are all things that she has a tendency to do, and a lot of that emphasis is based on enjoying the experience of what you're eating together. That's a big deal to her. If I were to just say, nope, I got to get this eaten because I got to get back to work and I've got things to do and I've got a mission to destroy and I need to take on the world, I don't think she would be very happy with me.
Yeah.
So I think that there's something to be said about not spending 2 hours at a table. I think maybe that would be a more appropriate perspective on it. But I like the food that my wife makes, so I'm not going to just treat it like it's a tool. That's my perspective.
I think that's fine. I don't think that's in contrast to what he's saying. That's interesting. I did not make that connection, because the junk for me typically happens when I haven't thought about what I'm going to do for a specific meal. So I'm like, oh, well, I'll just order a burrito or something.
Sure, yeah.
Or the stuff that happens in between meals, which is, again, not at all the same thing that you're talking about, where we're going to sit down together at this time and we're going to share a meal together. I agree. There's something additional to that experience beyond the nutritional value of the food and feeding the machine. But I think the approach of you don't need the extra stuff whenever you have the tiniest little craving, that is the big takeaway here for me. And I agree with that 100%. For me, it usually is like if I've had a long day after dinner, kids have gone to bed, like that's the point where I'm just find myself in the kitchen rummaging through the pantry,
Right.
looking for something to eat, so he's speaking directly to me. He's like, that
Sure.
9 o'clock snack that you have, like, you don't need that. And it's never anything like potato chips or ice cream. Usually it's like stuff that's on his list. We've got a big thing of peanuts, I'll grab some peanuts, but I just find myself not even thinking about it sometimes, just standing in the pantry looking at that stuff.
What can I grab off the shelf and eat right now? That's what I'm looking for.
And so now when I open that pantry, I'm going to see Jocko's face. He's going to be like, back away. You don't need to eat.
Amazing. Oh, so very valid.
That's fuel. Last one here is repair and maintenance. Well, before the workouts, repair and maintenance, injury prevention and recovery. Shortest section in the book. There's 2 chapters here, one on stretching. I'm curious, what did you think about this chapter?
I've heard a lot of things about stretching doesn't matter. I don't know if that's true or not. I've seen some studies that show if you stretch before you work out versus not stretching before you work out makes no difference. Like, I've seen some studies around that, which is interesting to me. But I think, and the perspective I had on it with that background is that, well, stretching does help you get blood flow going and get your not metabolism, but your heart rate up a bit. They don't really talk about that aspect of it in the studies that I'm referring to. They generally are talking about muscle tearing and such in that process. So I don't think it's a good thing to skip your stretching routine before you do a workout. But I can't say there was anything in his particular explanation of this that I would say is, yes, absolutely. Oh, that's life-changing. Like, oh, well, stretch. So that was my perspective.
So he did not convince you to start stretching, it sounds like.
Not for stretching's sake, no.
Okay.
Did it you?
Well, I've been doing this for years, to be honest, because I have dealt with sciatic nerve pain.
Okay.
And when I went to the physical therapist for the stuff with my knee, they gave me some stretches which help not only with like the ligaments, because it was my my tendon had slipped off of my kneecap and onto the side of my leg, which is why I had to go to the physical therapist in the first place. But I've got a whole like custom routine that I do for back and legs, core stretches essentially every single morning, which has alleviated the sciatic pain altogether.
Sure.
So this is absolutely life-changing for me.
Sure.
Because every once in a while, I'll wake up with that sciatic pain and like it's just burning down like both of my legs behind my knees, and it just is this dull but also intense pain to the point where like I can't sleep at night, and I'm uncomfortable basically no matter what I do. And so I never want to experience that again, and stretching has greatly reduced that for me.
So maybe I should introduce this. I don't know. I should maybe look at, I have some logs from when I was doing yoga daily. I don't know that I ever connected differences in like mood, stress, and such whenever I was in the middle of that. I'll have to go look. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm curious.
I think everybody is going to have their own version of like what are the stretches that provide the most benefit. But I could totally see a scenario where everyone has something that they could do that would improve their life, not just prevent injury, but alleviate pain, which obviously is tied to like a whole bunch of other stuff. I don't know anything about what you were talking about with stretching prior to working out and things like that. I've just always done that.
Yeah,
Usually before I go for a run and then after I go for a run.
correct. That's what I do.
I do know that the days that I don't stretch when I come back, I feel it the next day.
Sure.
But I almost never, actually, I do never go for a run. I never exercise without stretching first. So I can't.
It just
speak
seems
to,
weird. It feels
whether
weird
I
too.
would. It does. I don't think I would feel real great about going out for a long run without stretching first. But, and then the other thing here with dealing with injuries and illness, he makes the point that you are going to get injured, you are going to get sick. And the advice here, I think, is spot on, that when that happens, do what you can. And if you can't do something specifically because you are injured, if you hurt your leg, you're not going to go for a run, find something else that you can do. I kind of had to do this when I did hurt my knee when I was running. I couldn't run for a long time, but I could use the exercise bike at the gym. So I did that instead. And then they told me through physical therapy that's actually really good because it builds up the muscles and keeps your tendon where it's supposed to be. It's either like build up those muscles and hope the tendon goes back, or have surgery. And I'm like, no, I don't want to have surgery.
Okay, I'll do whatever you say.
So
whatever you say, I'll do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like that. And I think that's an approach I can take with other areas of my life, where if you can't do something, doesn't mean you can't do anything. So look for the alternatives.
In other words, keep doing actions. Don't stop.
Exactly.
Doesn't matter what
Just
it
maybe
is. Just
not,
keep going.
Just maybe not the actions Jocko would recommend, because the last section here is the appendix. That's all the workouts. I have no interest in doing any of these. I've kind of dialed in specifically the workouts that make a difference for me. And like I said, I've gone through physical therapy, so I know that there are certain things that I do need to incorporate into my routine, like regular biking or cycling. And I'm not going to drop all of that and do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instead.
Right.
But I think if you're into that sort of thing, I know nothing about CrossFit, but this seems to me like this would be very similar, the types of things that you would be doing. If you don't have access to a CrossFit gym and you're looking for something you can do from home, the stuff that he recommends at the end, because it's broken down into like beginner, intermediate, advanced, that probably is a great place to start, but I'm not going to.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. I had a chance to, pre-COVID, ran sound at a CrossFit gym it was like an anniversary celebration that they did for the CrossFit gym itself. So every year they would do some big celebration, and the band was asked to come in and play music. So I went and ran sound for it. So I got to talk to a lot of the people who go to the gym, and did not know until that night that one of the band members was a member of the gym and participated in CrossFit. Didn't know that. So it was very fun to learn that too. But a lot of the activities that I learned about from folks who were at that event seem to correlate very strongly with what Jocko recommends here. I know that just from seeing a lot of the pictures that are on every single page of the entire book in the background, it seems like there's a lot of the same equipment that I remember seeing at that CrossFit facility. So I think he's a fan of CrossFit, would be my guess.
Probably. Yeah. All right. That's everything. Anything else you want to add?
This is exactly what you would expect from a Navy SEAL when it comes to motivation.
That is true.
That is exactly what I would expect. Like, do the thing. Don't say it's too hard. No excuses. Get your tail to work. Like, that is exactly what you get with this book. And I don't think I was disappointed at all in this. This is a case where I think I got exactly what I expected. I will say the form factor of it was very different from what I expected, but it's definitely a motivation book through and through. A little bit of application, but mostly a motivation book.
Yeah, I have no military experience, but it occurs to me that maybe the reason that they take that approach is because they have proven it over and over and over and over and over again. Like from the moment that you arrive in basic training, they're forcing you to do things that you didn't really think you could do. And I don't know, maybe I need some of that.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe not. I don't know. I think there's no harm in pushing yourself to see what you're capable of. Even for someone like me, who, like with the sleep section, you know, I have medical reasons why I'm not going to do certain things in a specific way. But even with that, I think a lot of the stuff that would hold me back from doing what he's telling me to do is just kind of preference stuff. And at that point, you know, if I really want to reach my full potential, then I should give it a shot. And yeah, so I guess getting into style and rating, I like this book in the format. I had a little bit of trouble, as I mentioned, with some of the military language just because of what happened recently in the US.
Yeah.
But I was able to go through it and distill the principles, but I can see that being off-putting for some other people. So just know what you're getting into if you're going to pick this one up. Recognize who Jocko Willink is and what his tone is going to be. If you got a problem with that, then stay away.
Skip it.
But I think that a lot of the stuff that he talks about, especially in the thoughts section, if you were to package just that part into a book, I feel like it would be worth it. The actions I thought the action section was pretty good too. When you got to the fuel and the repair and maintenance, that was definitely the weakest part in my opinion. But you're right. Those two parts, those are basically the main sections of the book. That's really what he wants to focus on, is the mindsets and then the actions that come from those mindsets. He does a really great job, I feel like, no matter what your situation is, of inspiring you to take action, whatever that looks like for you. Obviously, there's a physical exercise tone to a lot of this, but as we talked about at the beginning, I feel like there's a lot of direct application here for knowledge workers that he doesn't need to speak directly to that part in order for you to get it. Very easy read because of the way that it's put together. It's a pretty thick book. It is 200 something pages, but some of the pages have 50 words on them at the most. It's a work of art, basically. It's not just a bunch of words that you read like you would think of for a typical book. I am glad to have gone through this. I am not sure how transformational this is going to be. I also don't think you can rate this on the same level with some of the other stuff that we've read. And I don't think it's on the same level in terms of completely changing your perspective as something like Extreme Ownership even. So I'm going to rate this at 4.0. I do think that just about anybody can go through this and get something out of it. I do think there's a lot of good stuff in here. I feel like he challenges a lot of the norms that maybe you've just believed a certain thing for a long time. He's kind of intentionally trying to destroy your thought processes around certain things and get you to try something a little bit different. And I feel like he's very successful with that. I got done with the book and did not feel bad, like I was being yelled at for a long time. I felt inspired to start getting up earlier, going to bed earlier, changing some of my habits and things like that. So a mission accomplished in my opinion with this book. But recognize that's what you're getting. You know, if you're not looking for something that is motivational to get you to just show up and do the things that you know you need to do, if you really have no idea where to even start, maybe this isn't the best book for you. Maybe something like Atomic Habits or Tiny Habits or something like that would be a little bit better. But I thought it was great for where we are and recognizing the bank of knowledge that we already have from the books that we've gone through. I feel like this is a good complement to a lot of that stuff, but not your traditional bookworm book. I think that's a good thing though in this scenario.
Yeah, I think that's very valid. This is something that I'm very grateful for having read. I can't say that this is one that I would tell people to read in isolation from other books, like what you were saying. It's a really good one if you have a bank. Or I would also say if you have listened to a bunch of Bookworm episodes and then you read this, I think it would be helpful. Because I don't know that having actually read the books, but at least understanding a lot of the principles that we cover here on Bookworm on the podcast, then picking this up is a good move, I would say. I think you nailed the rating at 4.0. I will join you there. So we have a double 4. But I think this is one that, for me, I'm grateful for him kind of destroying some of the, like one of the things was, where did it go? Don't do what makes you happy, do what makes you better. That was one of his quotes in the book. It's like, I'm with you on that, because you can kind of redefine what better means, but so many people tell you, like, find what makes you happy and do that every day. Like, that's what they tell you. It's like, that's just a load. It's just not what you should be doing day to day. If you do what makes you happy, usually if you just focus on that, it's very narcissistic and you end up hurting other people. If you really get into that, that's not what you should be doing. So don't. Focus on making yourself better and the people around you better. And if you do that, that's what you should be focusing on every day. That's, I think, some of the undertone in this book. And it's some of what he's trying to, like, break down some of the excuses and the walls that we put up to prevent ourselves from doing that. Because trying to make yourself better is not an easy task, and it's not one that's easily endeavored. So it's one that I think he does a good job motivating you to take on. So I think it's a great motivation book, which is exactly what he wrote it to be, I believe. One of the things that's a little weird to me is he calls it a field manual.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, in my head, I thought I was getting a motivational book. And then I saw a field manual on the front of it. And in my head, I was thinking, okay, well, now am I going to have like action items every day for things to do? Like, an actual manual of things you need to do? But that wasn't it until at least the very end.
If you're getting into CrossFit, it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you want to take his exercise routine and follow his sleep and all of the schedules he puts in place, yeah, absolutely, it's a manual. But he doesn't really call that a thing you have to do. These are just suggestions. It's not an actual bank of tasks to take on. So, again, it's a motivation book, and that's exactly what you get if you are having a hard time getting yourself to do things, procrastinating and such. Like, he'll completely debunk almost every excuse you can come up with. So it's great for that. I'll say that. So yes, I'll put it at 4.0.
So in terms of motivation, then, do you have any action items from this?
I do. I have one. I'm gonna try my best to do the morning workout. I don't know if that means getting myself to bed earlier, cutting my sleep slightly shorter than normal. I want to try to get to where I'm doing that daily. So I don't know what that is going to mean, but that is the task that I'm going to take on.
Well, yeah, I'm going to do the same thing. I mentioned it in the episode, but I'm going to try to get a strength workout in kind of as part of my morning routine. I've got this stuff right here. It doesn't have to take long. It would be like 15, 20 minutes, to be honest, if I would just settle down and do it. I just haven't really found the time to do that as part of my regular routine, and I think that makes a lot of sense to do it there. I'm also going to try to get up a little bit earlier. I will report back on what time that ends up being.
4:30?
But it's not going to be 4:30, I'll tell you that right now.
Take a picture of your watch. That's what you're supposed to do.
Not happening. Not happening. I am also going to put some thought into the way I wrote it is completing my home gym. It's not going to be complete, though. I'm going to figure out what else, if anything, I need. I'm going to start with looking at the rowing machines. Maybe I will get scared away by the price very quickly. I do not know. But
sure.
I haven't been to the gym in almost 9 months. And to be honest, I don't really have a desire to go back. Before everything got shut down, I was there 6 days a week. I'm still working out 6-7 days a week, but recognize that I don't need to get in the car and go there So kind of why would I, but I need to think through what are the things I really want to be able to do at home. And then do I have the equipment in order to do that? I feel like I'm pretty close, but I need to spend some time thinking about that.
Sure. Cool.
All right. So let's put this field manual on the shelf. What's next, Joe?
The next one up is The Organized Writer by Anthony Johnston. And I found out this did come out in November of last year. So this is a fairly new one. In my head, it was a new or an older one, but it's not. So I'm kind of excited about diving into this because I think it's one that'll be helpful for both you and I, since we tend to do a decent amount of writing and I'm like getting into more of it. So I think it'll be a good one to cover. It's like how to put together the tasks, actions, and such as a writer. So I think that'll be kind of an interesting topic for us to cover. So yes, that one's next. And then...
Cool. I'm excited to read that one. After that, we are going to cover a recommendation from many, many moons ago because it is now in stock again, and that is The Great Mental Models Volume 1 by... I don't
Shane
know the
Parrish.
authors. Shane Parrish. Okay, it's sponsored by Automatic, the WordPress company. It's a really pretty book, and it talks about a lot of the concepts that we talk about a lot. But I think this will be interesting. So this will be a great conversation. I think there's going to be a lot of stuff that we can talk about from this one, and
Sure.
how we're gonna apply this.
I'm excited about that one. I followed Shane Parrish. He writes the blog at Farnham Street. FarnhamStreet.com,
Farnham
I
Street.
think?
That's it. Yep.
Yeah, so I've followed him for a long time. Super bright guy. So I'm excited about going through that one. That'll be fun.
And if you like that book, I mean, there's 3 or 4 different volumes, I believe now. So they're they look cool.
Sure.
Got any Gap books?
No.
All right. Well, I do have one. I ordered this a while ago. It came not too long ago. Michael Hyatt has one of those little books out called No Fail Habits.
Sure.
So about the same size as like No Fail Meetings, stuff like that. Habits is a thing that I'm studying a lot at the moment.
for the last 3 years. Totally.
Well, I mentioned I'm working on an update to the best habit tracker app for
Right.
the Suite setup. I'm actually going to be doing a webinar not too far in the future on habits. So I'm just kind of like re-looking at everything, trying to see what else is new since the last time I looked at this stuff. And I don't know, beginning of the year, this is the time to think about habits, right? Make adjustments to the systems in your life. So that's kind of what I'm doing.
Cool.
All right. So thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us today. Thank you for reading along. Thank you specifically to our premium club members, the people who not just show up and listen or attend the live recordings, but actually put some money towards maintaining the show. That really means a lot to both Joe and myself. If you want to become a premium club member, it's $5 a month. There's a yearly option as well, and you get a couple of perks. One of the things that I added recently is the book notes that I take. I've mentioned it even in this episode. I create these MindNode files. Those are in a separate section in the Bookworm Club where you can download those, but I'm also starting to put all of those inside of a public Roam graph, and there's a link that you can get to that. So everything is connected. It's got all the quotes and things like that, because I recognize that a lot of people were using my mind maps as like a starting point for the books. So I think this might be a cool idea to allow like the community to build this out together. And the hope is that this turns into like a more complete collection of notes, kind of like a wiki of everything that has been done in Bookworm. I shared it with Joe. You don't need to have Roam in order to view it. It's a website. You put in the URL and you can click between the different things. And I'm pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with how that has turned out. So if you want to get access to that, that's another perk. We've got a wallpaper you can download. Joe's got a couple of Gap Book episodes. And really, you do have our undying gratitude. If you're willing to chip in a couple of bucks a month to help support the show, that really does mean a lot to us. So thank you to everybody who has done that.
Absolutely. And if you want to, I just want to point this out quickly. If you want to see the live video recording, working on getting those up on our YouTube channel as well. So you can do that as well in the future. So yes, if you are following along with us, if you're one of those who's willing to read the books in 2 weeks before we we release, check out The Organized Writer by Anthony Johnston. We'll cover that in a couple weeks, and we will see you then.